Some men spend their whole lives trying to be seen, trying to walk into a room and have people look up, trying to matter in ways that other people can measure. I spent mine doing the opposite, not because I lacked confidence, not because I was afraid, but because I learned a long time ago that the most powerful position a man can occupy is the one nobody knows he's standing in. I want you to understand that about me before anything else, because what I'm about to tell you will only make sense if you understand that first. My name is Douglas Cahill. I am 64 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a quiet street called Birchwood Place, in a house I have owned outright since 2009. 3 bedrooms. A back porch that faces a yard I keep reasonably well. A kitchen that has seen every significant decision of my adult life made at a round oak table that came from my mother's house in Greensboro when she passed in 2016. I drive a 2004 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it. It has a crack in the left rear taillight that I keep meaning to fix and have not gotten around to in approximately 4 years. My neighbor Gerald asks me about it every single time he sees me pulling into the driveway. I tell him I am getting to it. I am not getting to it. I retired from federal contracting in 2018 after 29 years. Before that, I spent most of my career managing infrastructure procurement for a mid-sized government services firm out of Raleigh, a company called Piedmont Federal Services that most people have never heard of and that I have no particular need to explain further, except to say that the work required a specific kind of mind: patient, detail-oriented, comfortable with the long view. I was good at it. I was never flashy at it, which in that particular industry is a form of excellence. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. My wife's name is Pamela. Pamela Cahill, née Whitmore. We met in the summer of 1988 at a mutual friend's backyard cookout in Greensboro. A man named Dale Briggs who made excellent barbecue and terrible decisions about who to invite at the same time, which is how Pamela and I ended up standing at the same folding table arguing over whether the potato salad had too much mustard. She said yes. I said no. She was right, but I have never fully admitted that. We were married in October of 1990 at a small church on Fisher Park Circle. 47 guests. I remember the number because I was the one who addressed the invitations, and I am the kind of man who counts things. I was happy. I want to be clear about that before anything else. For a long time, a genuinely long time, I was quietly, completely happy with the life we had built. Renee was born in 1992. We raised her in a house on the east side of Charlotte, moved to Birchwood Place when she was in high school, watched her become a sharper, more capable version of both of us, and felt the specific satisfaction of parents who did not ruin their child. That is not a small thing. I do not treat it as one. Pamela was always the sharper dresser between us, the one who knew how to work a room, who remembered the names of people's children and their dogs and their recent surgeries, who could sit across from a difficult client and make that client genuinely feel, like their problem was the most interesting problem in the room. She had an instinct for it. She had spent her 30s building a small interior design consultancy out of our second bedroom. And by the time Renee was a sophomore in high school, consultancy had 2 employees and a client list that included 4 restaurants and a law firm downtown. I was proud of her. I told her regularly, in the understated way that I tell people things, which she sometimes found insufficient and I sometimes found unfair. That was our tension. Most long marriages have one. In October of 2013, she came home on a Tuesday evening and sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me she had met someone who wanted to be her business partner. His name was Curtis Haig, 42 years old at the time, former commercial real estate developer who had spent 3 years transitioning into design consultancy work and had, by all visible measures, done it successfully. He had a client base and contacts and a particular ease with commercial clients that complemented what Pamela did well. She said he had capital and needed her aesthetic sensibility and her existing reputation in the Charlotte market. She believed they could build something real together. I listened. I asked questions. I asked about the proposed ownership structure, the capital split, what he was contributing and what she was contributing, and how decisions would get made when they disagreed. She said they hadn't worked out all the details yet. I asked if she had seen his prior business history. She said they had talked about it. I asked if she had seen the documents. She said not yet. I said, "What do you need from me?" She said she needed capital, enough to match his contribution, and come in as a genuine 50-50 partner, rather than the creative half with no financial standing. She had run numbers. She needed somewhere between $280,000 and $350,000 to enter the partnership on equal footing. I told her I would think about it. I did considerably more than think about it. I spent the following 3 weeks doing what I do when I need to understand something. I researched quietly and I documented everything I found. Curtis Haig had 2 prior business partnerships on record. The first was a commercial real estate venture in Greensboro that ran from 2004 to 2009. He exited cleanly when the market shifted. The second was a design-adjacent consulting firm in Raleigh from 2010 to 2012. He exited that one cleanly as well. Both exits were legally clean. No complaints filed, no litigation, no misconduct findings. But in both cases, the exit left Curtis Haig holding the majority of the client relationships, while his partners held the majority of the remaining operational costs. It was not fraud. It was a pattern. A man who was very good at positioning himself as indispensable during the growth phase of a partnership, and very good at extracting himself in a way that maximized his own future options. I recognized the pattern because it required the same kind of long-range thinking I had spent 29 years practicing. I respected it in the abstract. I did not want to apply it to my wife. I made a decision. I was not going to give Pamela the capital directly. Over the following 6 weeks, working with my attorney Bernard Foss and a Charlotte financial management firm called Aldrich Financial Group, I established a holding trust, Meridian Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware, administered quietly through Aldrich's South Tryon Street office. Through Meridian, over the first 2 years of the partnership's life, I contributed $340,000 in stage capital investments, not as Douglas Cahill, Pamela's husband, as a silent institutional investor holding 40% of the equity in Haig Whitmore Design Group, LLC. Bernard Foss had been practicing corporate law in Charlotte for 31 years at that point. He is a lean, deliberate man who wears the same style of dark suit in every season and speaks at the pace of someone who has learned that precision and speed are rarely compatible. He reviewed the trust structure carefully. He said, "Douglas, if anyone examines this, all they will see is a holding trust and a capital contribution agreement executed at arm's length." I told him that was exactly the point. He said, "I know. That is why I am telling you it works." Pamela knew I had helped. She did not know the shape of it. I told her I had arranged a private capital contribution through a contact from my contracting years, a quiet investor who preferred not to be named, which in that world is not an unusual preference. She accepted that. She trusted me in the way that people who have been married for more than 20 years trust each other about things that feel competently handled, not blindly, but with a specific confidence that comes from watching someone be reliable across a very long period of time. I want to be honest about why I did it the way I did it. I did not hide my involvement to deceive Pamela or to position myself over her. I hid it because Curtis Haig's history suggested he was a man who would, eventually, attempt to leverage his position in the partnership against whoever he could. I wanted to be in the room when that happened. I wanted a mechanism. I wanted Pamela to have protection she did not know she had, because protection she knew about would have changed how she operated, and she was operating well. I did not want to interfere with that. I just wanted to be there if it fell. For 9 years, I was there. Nobody knew I was in the room. The company grew steadily and then impressively. By 2017, they had moved out of shared office space and into their own suite on South End. By 2019, Haig Whitmore Design Group was billing $2.1 million annually, 6 full-time employees, 2 part-time contractors, a reputation in Charlotte's mid-market commercial interior space that Pamela had built with a particular combination of taste and persistence that had always been her strongest professional quality. They had 3 regional hotel groups on retainer and a residential division that was growing faster than either of them had projected. I watched all of it from the position of Meridian Holdings. Quarterly financial summaries that Victor Aldridge sent to a dedicated email account, read on Tuesday mornings at the kitchen table over my first cup of coffee. Curtis Haig was, by every measure, a capable partner. He brought in clients. He managed relationships. He was exceptional at the kind of dinner table conversation that turned a prospect into a contract, and I watched him work that skill at company events for 9 years without any particular concern. He had something specific, a quality that I can only describe as the gift of making every person in a room feel like the most interesting person in it. He deployed it consistently and well. I respected it the way you respect a well-made tool. I began to notice, in the latter months of 2021, that he was deploying it on my wife in a register that was no longer professional. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I want to be accurate and not dramatic about it. It was not a single moment of discovery. It was a series of small observations over approximately 4 months that accumulated the way evidence accumulates, individually unremarkable, collectively undeniable. Pamela staying later on Tuesday evenings in the pattern of the previous 8 years suggested was necessary. A change in the way she talked about Curtis in conversation, less as a colleague whose judgment she respected in the domain of business, and more as someone whose opinions on a wider range of things had begun to carry weight. A quality of distraction that I noticed in October and did not name to myself until November. The weekend conference in Asheville was a Wednesday in November 2021, the 10th. She mentioned it the Monday before, said it was a design industry gathering, said she would be back Sunday evening. I looked it up on Thursday morning while she was at the office. The conference ran Thursday through Friday. It ended at noon on Friday. She came home Sunday at 6:47 p.m. I did not say anything. I want to be completely direct about that. I made dinner that Sunday evening, chicken and rice, which is what I cook when I need to keep my hands occupied and my face calm, and we ate together, and she described the conference in the kind of detail that people use when they're describing something that is partially but not entirely true, and I listened and nodded and asked 2 questions, and neither of them was a question that was actually in my mind. Something inside me went very still that evening. Not the still of shock. I am not sure I was entirely shocked. The still of the man who has been watching something from a careful distance and has just watched it become clear, cold, specific, the particular cold that falls when a calculation you have been running for months finally resolves. I let myself feel that for the length of dinner. Then I cleared the plates. That night at 11:03 p.m., after Pamela went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a French press of coffee I did not need and my yellow legal pad, and I opened the Haig-Whitmore partnership agreement on my laptop, the full document, the one that Bernard Foss had drafted in 2014 and that Meridian Holdings had executed at formation. I read every section. I made notes in my handwriting, which my daughter Renee has described on multiple occasions as resembling the output of a physician who is also angry. I found 4 provisions that were directly relevant to what I was now considering. I closed the laptop at 12:44 a.m. I rinsed my cup. I went to bed. I did not sleep particularly well, but I slept. Monday morning, I drove to Aldridge Financial on South Tryon at 9:15 a.m. and sat down across from Victor Aldridge. Victor is a compact, meticulous man in his mid-50s with reading glasses he keeps on a chain around his neck, and a professional demeanor of someone who has spent 30 years making certain that no figure goes unrecorded and no obligation goes untracked. He is precisely the kind of boring that is extremely valuable in a man who manages your money. I told him what I suspected, not what I knew, what I suspected, and what I was beginning to think about doing. He pulled the Meridian file from the cabinet behind his desk without being asked. We spent 2 hours going through the capital contribution history, the equity structure, and the governance clauses. There was a provision in the partnership agreement, Section 11, Paragraph C, that granted Meridian Holdings the right to call for a full operational and fiduciary audit of Haig-Whitmore Design Group in the event of what the agreement termed material change in the management conduct or fiduciary posture of either named partner. The language was Bernard Foss's. I had asked for a mechanism, and Bernard had built one with the care of a man who understood that good legal architecture is built for weather that has not arrived yet. Victor read the clause twice. He removed his glasses from his chain and held them. He said, Douglas, this clause is already active. I said, I know. He looked at me carefully. He said, when do you want to file a request? I said, not yet. I want to be certain first. He nodded and asked nothing further. Victor Aldrich has managed Meridian's accounts for 9 years. He has learned that I do not move before I am ready, and that when I am ready, I do not need to be pushed. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts and comments. I spent the next 11 days maintaining my routines with the specific intentionality of a man who understands that routine is what keeps the thinking clear, when clear thinking is the only thing that matters. I woke at 5:50 every morning. I made coffee in the French press. I drove the Camry. I coach youth soccer on Tuesday and Thursday evenings at a park on Sardis Road. 11 and 12-year-olds who are learning, among other things, that positioning matters more than speed. I said nothing unusual to anyone. On the 12th day, I called Renee and asked her to come down to Charlotte that Saturday. She drove from Raleigh without asking why, which is one of the several ways in which Renee demonstrates, without calling attention to it, that she is a person of exceptional judgment. She arrived at 10:30 a.m. I put coffee on. We sat at the kitchen table, the same round oak table from my mother's house, and I put the yellow legal pad between us, and I told her everything. The trust, the structure, the 9 years, what I had noticed in November, what I was considering. She read my notes slowly. She did not interrupt. When she finished, she looked up and said, "How long have you known about Meridian?" I said, "Since the beginning." She said, "Does Mom know you own 40% of her company?" I said, "No." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, Gerald's lawn mower started up next door. Renee looked at me and said, "Dad, what do you actually want to happen here?" I told her plainly. She listened without flinching. When I was done, she said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" I said I needed her to know. That was all. She did not need to do anything. I just needed one person who was not my attorney to know what I was carrying, and I wanted that person to be her. She drove back to Raleigh that evening. I stood on the back porch for a few minutes after her taillights cleared the end of Birchwood Place. The air was cold and still in a way that late November evenings in Charlotte can be. Not unpleasant, just honest. I went inside. I locked the door. I called Bernard Foss at 8:17 p.m. and left him a message. He called back the next morning at 7:52. I said, "Bernard, it's time." He said, "I'll pull the file this morning." Now I want to tell you about the dinner, because the dinner is the center of this story, and I want you to have it in the right sequence. Haig Whitmore hosted a client appreciation dinner every year in the third week of November. The Dunno Hotel on North Tryon Street, downtown Charlotte. Private dining room on the second floor, typically 35 to 40 guests. I had attended every single one since the company's founding in 2014. I came as Pamela's husband. I wore the same charcoal wool suit I have owned since 2015 and maintained carefully. I shook hands, listened well, ate whatever was served, declined the open bar in favor of water or occasionally a single glass of something with dinner, and drove us home in the Camry afterward. Pamela used to joke gently that I was the least productive person at those dinners because I refused to actively network. I told her I was networking. I was doing it quietly. She said that was not how networking worked. I said it depended on what you were trying to learn. The 2021 dinner was Wednesday, the 18th of November. I remember the date precisely because I had a 7 a.m. call with Bernard that morning. We had been finalizing the audit request language for 2 days, and I sat in the parking lot of Panera on Providence Road with my phone on the dashboard waiting for the call to connect. And I remember thinking that by the time I put on that suit that evening, I would have already set the sequence in motion. The dinner proceeded as those dinners always did. The private room filled steadily between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. 41 guests, as it turned out. Pamela moved through the room with the ease of someone who has done this many times and genuinely enjoys it. The food was good. The conversation was loud and varied. Curtis Haig worked the room in a way that Curtis Haig always worked rooms. Unhurried, attentive, present to each person for exactly as long as that person needed him to be, then moving on with the smooth economy of a man whose practice is so thoroughly it no longer requires thought. At 8:43 p.m. I know, because I had just checked my phone under the table after a brief message from Victor about a document. He needed me to review a cluster of 3 clients gathered near the end of the bar, and Curtis materialized beside me the way he sometimes did at these events when he needed to account for my presence. And he made an introduction. He said, "This is Douglas. He's just Pam's husband." He smiled when he said it. Not a cruel smile. Not even a dismissive one. Precisely. The warm, easy smile of a man saying something he genuinely believes to be both accurate and harmless. One of the clients shook my hand. Curtis was already turning toward the next conversation before the handshake was complete. I nodded. I held my glass of water. I stood exactly where I was. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I have thought about that moment many times in the 2 years since, and I want to be accurate about what I felt, because accuracy matters to me more than drama. It was not anger. Anger is a loud thing. What I felt was quieter than that and colder. It was a precise sensation of a man who has been standing in a room for 9 years, a room he helped build, in a structure he owns 40% of, watching someone introduce him as furniture, a door he built, in a house he owns, and the man walking through it, without looking back. I drove Pamela home after dinner. She said it had gone well. I agreed. I parked the Camry in the driveway, patted the dashboard the way I always do when I park it at night, went inside, and hung up my suit. The next morning, I called Bernard Foss at 8 a.m. I said, "File the audit request today." He said, "It'll be submitted by noon." It was the audit request filed by Meridian Holdings under Section 11, Paragraph C, triggered a mandatory 30-day review period. Bernard retained a forensic accounting firm called Hargrove & Associates, whose principal, Patricia Hargrove, had spent 14 years as a senior examiner with the IRS before entering private practice. She is 58 years old, methodical in a specific way that comes from spending a career looking for what people try to hide, and Bernard described her professional reputation to me in 4 words. She does not miss things. She did not miss things. Over 23 days, she examined every financial record, client contract, vendor agreement, and operational log associated with Hague Whitmore Design Group, going back to January of 2019. What she found was this. Beginning in February of 2020, Curtis Hague had been systematically redirecting 3 of Hague Whitmore's largest commercial clients toward a separate venture, CHG Interiors LLC, incorporated in his name alone in February of that year. He had not disclosed CHG Interiors to Pamela. He had not disclosed it to Meridian Holdings. He had been using Hague Whitmore's vendor relationships, operational infrastructure, and in 2 documented cases, its actual project staff to service CHG Interiors clients, while billing the associated labor hours to Hague Whitmore's overhead accounts. 22 months. 18 clients touched in some capacity. For active client diversions in progress at the moment the audit was filed. It was not sloppy work. It was careful, incremental. Exactly the kind of long-game repositioning that I had seen the outline of in 2013 when I looked at his prior business history. He had been setting up his exit for nearly 2 years. He had been planning to leave Pamela, holding a company that looked healthy on the surface and had been systematically hollowed out underneath it. Patricia Hargrove delivered her preliminary findings to Bernard on a Tuesday morning. Bernard called me at 9:31 a.m. He said, "Douglas, she found it, all of it." I said, "How documented is it?" He said, 22 months of records, billing cross-references, vendor invoices, the CHG Interiors Incorporation date. She has a timeline that is going to be very difficult for anyone to argue with. I was sitting at the kitchen table. My coffee had gone cold while I was reading something, and I had not noticed until that moment. Outside the window, a woman I did not recognize was walking a small brown dog past a house on Birchwood Place. She glanced up at the window. I raised my hand slightly. She kept walking. I said, "What do our options look like?" Bernard walked me through 4 scenarios in order of escalation. I listened to all 4. I chose the third, the one that gave Curtis Hague a clean exit on terms that were entirely ours, and gave Pamela everything that belonged to her. 2 weeks after the findings were delivered, On a Thursday morning at 9 a.m., Bernard Foss and Patricia Hargrove sat across a conference table from Curtis Haig and his attorney, a man named Todd Breck, a partner at a mid-sized firm on Trade Street who I did not know personally, but whose public record suggested he was competent and pragmatic. The meeting took place at Bernard's office on Providence Road. I was not present. I did not need to be present. This was not a moment that required me. The meeting lasted 1 hour and 43 minutes. Bernard told me afterward that when Patricia Hargrove placed the audit findings on the table, a bound document, 74 pages, tabbed, indexed, with a one-page executive summary on top that laid out the 22-month timeline in plain language, Curtis Haig picked it up and looked at it the way a man looks at something he's been telling himself would never exist. He read the summary page. He set it down. He read it again. His attorney asked for a recess. They were gone 40 minutes. When they came back, Todd Breck said his client was prepared to discuss terms. The terms were Bernard's, drafted the week before with the specificity of a man who has been building to this moment for 9 years, even if he has never said so out loud. Curtis Haig would exit the partnership immediately and in full. His equity stake in Haig Whitmore Design Group will be transferred to Pamela at a valuation that accounted for the revenue diverted to CHE Interiors over the audit period, meaning he would receive considerably less than the market value of a healthy 50% stake, because the audit had documented exactly how unhealthy that stake had made the company. He would have no right to solicit any current or former Haig Whitmore client for a period of 36 months. CHE Interiors, LLC will be dissolved within 30 days. The audit findings will be held in escrow by Bernard's firm and not filed with any regulatory or professional body, provided all terms were met on schedule. Todd Breck reviewed the terms with his client. There was a quiet exchange between them. Then Todd Breck said, "My client would like to know the identity of Meridian Holdings." Bernard looked at him without expression. He said, "Meridian Holdings is a 40% equity partner in Haig Whitmore Design Group. It has held that position since 2014. Its identity is not a term of this agreement and is not subject to disclosure or negotiation." There was a pause that Bernard later described to me as approximately 12 seconds. Curtis Haig looked at his attorney. Then he looked at the document. Then he said quietly, "Is it Douglas?" Bernard said, "The terms are in front of you, Mr. Haig." Curtis Haig signed on a Friday morning, 28 days after the audit request was filed. I was sitting at the counter of the Foothills Coffee Shop on Providence Road when Bernard called at 10:14 a.m. to confirm the signatures. I was on my second cup. The woman behind the counter, whose name is Deb and who's been making my order without my asking for it for the better part of 3 years, had just recommended a new single-origin roast from a small farm in Guatemala that she said I would like. I told her I would try it next time. Bernard said, "It's done. All pages signed. I'll messenger the originals to your house this afternoon." I said, "Thank you, Bernard." He said, "It was a well-constructed structure, Douglas. 9 years is a long time to hold something like that in reserve." I said, "It only needed to work once." I told Pamela that evening. I had spent the afternoon thinking about how to do it, and I had decided that there was no good way except the direct one. I sat her down at the kitchen table at 6:30 p.m., and I told her everything. Meridian Holdings, the $340,000, the 40%, the 9 years, the Asheville conference, what I had suspected and when, Victor Aldridge and the audit clause and Patricia Hargrove, and the 74-page document and what it contained, the terms Curtis had signed, all of it. I put the documents on the table in front of her. I did not rush through any of it. I told her the way I would tell anything that matters, plainly, in order, without decoration. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. I let her be quiet. I poured her a glass of water and put it near her and sat back down and waited. She said, "You have owned 40% of my company since 2014. I said, "Yes." She said, "And you never told me." I said, "No." She looked at the documents. Then she looked at me. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because it was never about the ownership. It was about making sure you were protected, if you needed it. If I had told you, you would have thought about it every time you made a decision. I didn't want you operating with that weight. I wanted you to build freely, and I wanted there to be a net underneath if it came to that. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Were you watching me?" I said, "I was watching the structure, not you." I don't know if that distinction satisfied her entirely. I believe it was a true thing, and I believe she knew it was a true thing. And I also believe she understood that in a long marriage, the line between watching a structure and watching a person can be thinner than either party is entirely comfortable with. We talked for a long time that evening. We did not resolve everything in one night. Some things in a marriage of 33 years cannot be resolved in a single conversation, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But at the end of it, she looked at the document spread across the table, and then she looked at me and she said, "He was going to take the whole thing, eventually." I said, "Yes, that was always the plan." She nodded slowly. She said, "Okay." It was not a simple okay. It was the okay of a woman placing something very large into a new context and needing a moment to let it settle into its correct position. I recognized what it was. I gave her the moment. We had dinner. I washed the dishes. She dried. That was 2 years ago. Haig Whitmore Design Group is Whitmore Design Group now. Pamela owns it entirely. All equity transferred. Meridian Holdings dissolved per the restructuring agreement that Bernard finalized in January of 2022. She brought in a new operations director in the spring, a woman named Sandra Pruitt, 47 years old, former senior project lead from a design firm in Atlanta, direct and unhurried, and exactly the caliber of professional partner that Pamela deserved to be working beside from the beginning. The company billed $2.4 million last year. The residential division grew 31%. 2 new hotel groups signed in the fall. Pamela presented at a regional design conference in Raleigh in October and came home that Sunday evening with the specific energy of a person who's been reminded that they are very good at what they do. I still drive the Camry. I got the taillight fixed in March, which surprised Gerald so thoroughly that he walked across the yard to inspect it in person. He said it only took 4 years. I told him I am a methodical man. He shook his head and went back inside, which is the correct response. I coach soccer on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The Guatemala roast at Foothills, as it turned out, is excellent. Deb was right, as she usually is about coffee. I told her so, and she said she knew. Curtis Haig relocated to Atlanta the following spring. CHE Interiors was dissolved on schedule per the terms. I have not seen him since the evening of the Dunhill Hotel dinner, 8:43 p.m. on a Wednesday in November, the moment he smiled and introduced me to a client as just Pam's husband and turned away before the handshake was finished. I think about that moment sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Not with satisfaction, exactly, with a very specific quiet clarity. The clarity of a man who spent 9 years standing in a room that nobody knew he was standing in, and who, when the moment required it, simply allowed himself to be known. I want to leave you with one thing. There is a kind of man who confuses silence for emptiness, who looks at a quiet life and registers nothing worth accounting for, who introduces another man's husband as incidental and moves on before the words have finished landing, because the assessment feels obvious and complete. These men are not villains. They are simply careless about what lies outside their field of vision. And the thing about what lies outside your field of vision is that it does not stop existing because you have chosen not to look at it. I built something for 29 years in federal contracting. I built a structure for 9 years through a holding trust. I built a marriage for 33 years in the only way I have ever known how to build anything. Carefully, without fanfare, and with patience for a future that might eventually need what I had quietly prepared. Some things only need to work once. The ones that work once are the ones you built right. 31 years of marriage, 1 audit, and a company that now belongs entirely to the woman who earned every square inch of it. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.